We are told that fairy tales are meant to comfort us, to lull us into a peaceful slumber. But the original stories, the ancient ones, were never about comfort. They were about power, manipulation, and the brutal reality of survival in a world that sees you only as meat or labor. Today, we strip away the magic carpets and the romantic illusions of the 1001 Nights. We dive into the dark, hidden origins of a tale involving a merchant, a bull, and a donkey. This is not a story about talking animals learning a lesson. This is a cold, calculated breakdown of exploitation, domestic tyranny, and the lengths to which living beings will go to avoid the slaughterhouse. A wealthy merchant possessed a dark secret, a divine gift that allowed him to hear the hidden languages of the beasts. He did not use it for empathy. He used it for absolute control. And this secret would soon push his entire household to the brink of death. But who was the true monster in this house of whispers? The answer will leave you questioning every bedtime story you've ever heard. Let us examine the economic reality of this merchant's estate. In the cold, damp shadows of his barn, a rigid caste system was enforced every single day. On one side, the bull, a massive, exhausted engine of flesh and bone, condemned to a life of endless agony. Every sunrise, the yoke was violently strapped to his calloused neck. He was forced to plow the unyielding earth and turn the crushing weight of the millstone until his muscles screamed and his lungs burned. On the other side of the barn stood the donkey, the privileged elite of the animal kingdom. His stall was meticulously swept, sprinkled with fresh water, his trough overflowing with sifted barley and golden straw. His only duty was to occasionally carry the merchant on short, effortless journeys. The donkey lived in luxury, while the bull bled into the soil. This was the cool design of the master, pitting the laborer against the aristocrat. But resentment is a dangerous seed in the dark. And what happens when the privileged decide to offer advice to the damned? A rebellion is born, but it is one built on a fatal miscalculation. One evening, the merchant stood hidden in the shadows, his ears tuned to the frequencies of the barnyard. He listened as the exhausted bull finally broke his silence. The bull looked at the donkey and said, "I am broken. While you rest in luxury, eating sifted grain and being groomed by our masters." The donkey, arrogant and utterly detached from the reality of hard labor, decided to play the strategist. He leaned over the partition and whispered a toxic plan into the bull's ear. He told the bull to strike, to engage in an act of absolute defiance. "When they bring the yoke," he advised, "throw yourself to the dirt. Let them beat you, but do not rise. When they bring your evening beans, refuse to eat. Starve yourself for 3 days. Feign a deadly illness, and you will be freed from your eternal torture." It was a brilliant, manipulative scheme of passive resistance. But the donkey forgot one crucial variable. He forgot who was listening in the dark. What happens when the master knows your rebellion before it even begins? The punishment that follows is a masterclass in psychological warfare. The next morning, the trap was sprung. The plowman arrived with the morning feed, expecting the usual submission from the massive beast. But the bull, following the donkey's arrogant advice, had barely touched his evening meal. When the plowman tried to lead him to the fields, the bull collapsed, acting the part of the dying laborer perfectly. The plowman, ignorant of the deception, ran to the merchant with panic in his eyes. He reported that the great beast was useless, sick, and refusing all nourishment. The merchant sat in his opulent chair, a cold, cynical smile spreading across his face. He already knew the truth. He had heard the conspiracy in the dark. He didn't order medicine for the bull, nor did he order the plowman to let the fields go unplowed. Instead, the merchant delivered a sentence of poetic, ruthless justice. He looked at the plowman and gave a very simple, devastating command. Take the donkey. Yoke the donkey to the plow and make him work the fields all day long. The architect of the rebellion was about to experience the true cost of labor. And the fields of this estate have no mercy for soft flesh. By sunset, the donkey's illusion of superiority was utterly shattered. He was dragged back into the barn, a broken, trembling shell of an animal. His neck was rubbed raw and bleeding from the heavy, unforgiving wood of the yoke. His lungs gasped for air, his elegant legs shaking from the brutal, unaccustomed strain of dragging the plow through hard soil. The bull, resting comfortably in his stall, looked down at his bleeding comrade. The bull thanked him profusely, praising the donkey's brilliant advice that had granted him a day of sweet, painless rest. But the donkey did not answer. The donkey was consumed by a dark, suffocating regret. He realized that his cleverness had trapped him in a nightmare. If he didn't fix this immediately, he would be sent back to the fields tomorrow, and the day after, until his heart gave out in the mud. The pampered aristocrat had to pivot. He had to betray his friend to save his own life. But how do you convince a resting slave to voluntarily put the chains back on? You introduce the only thing stronger than exhaustion. Absolute, primal terror. The next evening, after another day of agonizing torture in the fields, the donkey approached the bull with a new, venomous lie. He masked his desperation with the tone of a concerned, loyal friend. He whispered, "I have enjoyed my rest, but my mouth has caused my ruin. I must warn you, for I am your most sincere advisor." The donkey leaned closer, his voice trembling with manufactured fear. "I overheard our master speaking to the butcher. He said, 'If the bull does not rise tomorrow, he is completely useless to us. Hand him over to the slaughterhouse. Let the butcher cut his throat, drain his blood, and carve his skin into strips.'" The donkey let the silence hang in the air, watching the terror wash over the bull's eyes. "I fear for your life," he whispered, "and so I deliver this warning." The strategy was flawless. It was a complete fabrication, born of pure selfishness. The bull, terrified of the butcher's blade, immediately abandoned his strike. He devoured his food, licking the trough clean, desperate to prove his worth. But the merchant was listening again, and what he heard would trigger a chain of events that would nearly cost him his own life. As the sun rose, the merchant and his wife walked out to the barnyard to observe the results of his psychological experiment. The plowman arrived and unlocked the bull's stall. The bull, absolutely paralyzed by the fear of the butcher's knife, practically sprinted out of the barn. He threw his tail in the air, kicked his legs, and displayed a pathetic, desperate show of vitality to prove he wasn't ready for the slaughter. The merchant, watching this grand tragicomedy of manipulation unfold, burst into hysterical laughter. He laughed so hard he fell backward, tears streaming down his face at the sheer absurdity of the animal's desperate political games. But his wife, standing beside him, did not share the joke. She stared at him with cold, suspicious eyes. "Why are you laughing?" she demanded. The merchant, bound by a deadly curse, replied that he had seen a secret, but if he revealed it, he would instantly die. This was the ultimate mistake. Never tell a paranoid spouse that you have a secret worth dying for. Because human curiosity, fueled by insecurity, is infinitely more dangerous than any butcher's knife. The true horror of this household was just waking up. The wife's obsession became a toxic, suffocating fog that consumed the entire estate. She did not care about the magical curse. She did not care about his impending death. She was utterly convinced that his laughter was directed at her, a hidden mockery that she could not tolerate. "You must tell me," she screamed, "even if it costs you your life." The merchant pleaded with her, reminding her of his love, of their shared history. He was 120 years old, an old patriarch begging for a few more years of peace. But she was relentless. She badgered him, starved him of affection, and tortured his mind until his iron will finally broke. Defeated, the merchant prepared for his own execution. He summoned his children. He sent for the judge and the witnesses to draft his final will and testament. He called all his relatives and neighbors to gather around his deathbed. He was going to speak the secret, and then his heart would stop. The entire family begged the wife to relent, pleading with her to spare the father of her children. But her pride was a black hole. "Let him die," she spat. "I will not stop until I know." As the merchant walked to the courtyard to perform his final ablutions, he heard a sound that would change everything. A lesson in brutality delivered by a rooster. In the courtyard, the shadow of death hung heavy. The family dog howled in genuine grief, mourning the imminent demise of its master. But nearby, the farm's rooster was gleefully mounting his hens, entirely unfazed by the tragic atmosphere. The dog snarled at the rooster, calling him a heartless beast for celebrating while their master prepared to die. The rooster paused, looked at the dog, and delivered a chilling monologue of cynical wisdom. "By Allah, our master is an absolute fool," the rooster crowed. "I manage 50 wives. I know exactly how to pacify one and discipline another to keep my empire in perfect order. But our master? He has only one wife, and he lets her drive him to the grave." The rooster's solution was devoid of any modern morality. It was raw, patriarchal violence. "If I were him," the rooster said, "I would take a bundle of fresh, heavy mulberry switches. I would drag her into the dark closet, and I would beat her until she either died or swore never to ask a question again." The merchant, standing with water dripping from his hands, heard every single word. And in that moment, The loving husband died, replaced by a ruthless tyrant. The tragedy was canceled. The thriller was about to reach its violent climax. The merchant did not return to his deathbed. He walked quietly to the edge of his property and cut a thick bundle of heavy, flexible mulberry branches. He hid them in the darkest, most isolated closet of his grand house. He then returned to his waiting family, his face a mask of solemn submission. He looked at his greedy, relentless wife and whispered, "Come with me into the closet. I will whisper the secret to you alone, away from prying eyes, and then I will die." Triumphant, blinded by her own ego, the wife followed him into the pitch-black room. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, and the iron lock clicked into place. The merchant did not whisper the secret of the animals. He raised the mulberry branches. The silence of the house was shattered by the sharp, terrifying crack of the switches and the sudden, desperate screams of the wife. He beat her without mercy, stripping away her pride, her arrogance, and her demands. She screamed for forgiveness, swearing she repented, begging for mercy in the dark. When the door finally opened, she crawled out, kissing his hands and feet. The family rejoiced at the sudden peace, but it was a peace built on trauma, violence, and absolute suppression. This is the story the vizier told his daughter, Shahrazad, a warning of what happens when you challenge the master. But Shahrazad was not listening. The vizier told this brutal tale to terrorize his own daughter. He wanted Shahrazad to understand that King Shahryar was a monster, a man who butchered a new virgin every single morning. He wanted her to know that if she volunteered to marry the king, she would end up dead or broken like the merchant's wife. But Shahrazad looked at her father, completely unfazed by the threat of violence. She did not see a warning. She saw a strategy. "What I want is inevitable," she told him coldly. She knew that brute force was the tool of the weak-minded, like the merchant or the rooster. True power lay in manipulation, in the slow, agonizing drip of suspense. She instructed her younger sister, Dunyazad, to lay the trap. "When the king has finished using my body," Shahrazad instructed, "you must ask me to tell a story to pass the sleepless hours." She was walking into a slaughterhouse, armed with nothing but words. The vizier, defeated by his daughter's iron will, dressed her in wedding garments that felt like a burial shroud. He led her to the palace, handing his own flesh and blood over to a serial killer. The doors of the royal bedchamber echoed as they closed. There was no escape now. The greatest psychological game in human history was about to commence. The bedchamber of King Shahryar smelled of incense and dried blood. He was a man hollowed out by betrayal, substituting intimacy with daily murder. When the vizier offered him his daughter, the king eagerly accepted, hungry for his next victim. But as he reached for Shahrazad, she began to weep. Perfect, calculated tears. "What is wrong with you?" the king demanded, annoyed by the delay. She whispered, "O king, I have a little sister, and I wish to say goodbye to her before I die." The king, feeling a flicker of sadistic generosity, allowed Dunyazad into the room. The sister sat quietly on the cold floor beside the royal bed. The king took Shahrazad, satisfying his dark desires. But as the heavy silence of the night settled in, the trap was sprung. Dunyazad looked up and whispered, "Sister, tell us a story to cut short these sleepless hours." Shahrazad looked at the king, her eyes reflecting the dim candlelight. With love and gladness, she whispered, "If the perfect king permits me." Shahryar, plagued by the insomnia of a murderer, nodded his head. He thought he was in control. He didn't realize he had just put his own neck into the yoke. And so, the first night began.